SMUSports.com. Paul Catalina and Craig Smoke. I'm David Smoke. We appreciate your time today on 365 Sports. Mike Craven, Dave Campbell's Texas Football Magazine. I reached out to you, Mike, last week about jumping on with us, and then you showed me your schedule. Today is the only off day you have, like for the next, from last week into this week and forever? Did you decompress, or are we getting in the middle of that?
You're mute, Mike. You're muted, Mike.
Yeah, let's see.
Sorry, I did decompress a little bit, but we have a newborn at home, so the road might be a little bit easier for me to sleep than even home is. So kind of a balance there during magazine season.
Mike, when you go to these spring tours, how much has changed about the way that you approach it in the new era of college football and roster building and the way you observe things and notice things? Because it is, like used to be, you kind of walk into a place kind of knowing maybe what your story was definitely going to be. Now you're probably in a lot of maybe, aren't you?
Well, luckily for us, the SIDs do a pretty solid job of updating those rosters early part of spring. But yeah, I mean, you do walk in not knowing if a senior's gone or if a senior's back. I mean, you used to, if a guy was a senior and he played most of the season, you assumed he was gone. Now, it's 50-50, and you kind of walk into these interviews and you're like, so-and-so, he's gone, right? So yeah, it is crazy. And then with the transfer portal, and now also with early enrollees and just that being a pretty prominent thing, I'd say half the roster or more is typically turned over every single time we stop in for the spring. So it definitely is different.
So, Mike, how'd you kind of decide on your path and where you were going to go and, kind of the order? Or was there anything intentional about that, or was it just kind of throwing darts? Kind of explain all that to us.
Yeah, so I think the most I've improved in my career at Dave Campbell's is logistically, probably not even as a writer or anything. It's just like figuring this thing out. And so the first couple of years, it was a dartboard. You just kind of took the dates and, you'd be in Lubbock one day and then Houston. And I was like, I can't do that anymore. And so I kind of divided in half. I have the Waco up to DFW to do those three, and then Lubbock, and then back to Austin. I live in Austin, so I kind of make that triangle. And then the next week I do Houston, Texas State, Rice, A&M, and do that triangle and come back. So I try to make it to where I'm not scattered because this state's just so darn big.
All right, let's just pick a team. You've been you've been to SMU, TCU, Baylor, and Tech, right? Are you there, Mike? I think we lost him. We'll try to regroup. Yeah, he lost the audio. I'm not sure. So are you there? Okay. Yeah. You've been to SMU, TCU, Baylor, Texas Tech. Is that correct?
Yeah, and A&M yesterday.
And A&M. So let's start with SMU, coming off that first year in the ACC, and obviously made a hell of a run. Your thoughts about where they are, Rhett Lashley, the year after, now that they're a part of the Power Four and entrenched?
Yeah, the defense has a lot of turnover. I mean, they lose their best defensive end in Elijah Robertson, a couple defensive tackles, both of their starting middle linebackers. And so it's just getting into the transfer portal and replacing those guys. And they've recruited more and more high school each year that Rhett Lashley's been there. So they have some young guys that they think are ready to step up. They're going to need to outscore some teams, though. Kevin Jennings is going through an offseason as actually the starting quarterback. Last year he got mostly the second team snaps behind Preston Stone. New wide receiver group. Jordan Hudson's probably the biggest name there that's back. New running backs. So they had definitely loaded up for that first year in the P4, put a lot of eggs in that basket to kind of get there and not get embarrassed, and it turned into the Cinderella season. And now they're going to have to do it with a mostly new crop of players.
What kind of gas do you think they're cooking with now, Mike? I mean, it's a totally different feel now that you made the college football playoff and you've had such a successful first year. I mean, there's no more talking about what ifs and if we get the chance. I mean, they went out and they took full advantage for the most part of their opportunities last year. Does it feel a little bit different around the hilltop in terms of just the place of SMU in the greater Texas football conversation?
Yeah, 100%. They're kind of back. I mean, I was born in 1985. So to me, SMU in the glory days were kind of like a smoke dream by my uncles, just talking about this team that used to give out cars and money and all this kind of stuff. And I just never do it, right? Like they were never good in my lifetime. And so, after they made that run, you go back in there and you kind of get that feeling. The facilities have gotten improved. They have a whole new thing going on in their end zone complex. And so it is major football there. They're definitely back in the national spotlight, and it's one thing to kind of catch lightning in a bottle. They didn't play Miami, they didn't play Clemson last year in the regular season. We'll see what happens this year because the schedule's much tougher. Baylor at TCU, at Clemson, they get Miami at home, so they could be just as good as they were last year and go 8-4, and just had a harder road to get there.
You said you went to A&M yesterday. Mike Elko, year 2. He did a better job, I think, than most people thought he would. I mean, until the Texas game, they were in it for the conference title. What do you think is the next step for Marcel Reed and that offense? Because even though they lose a lot on defense, Mike Elko's kind of got that part figured out probably.
Yeah, it's the passing game, specifically the downfield passing game. I think they're going to run the ball tremendously. They have, I think, their top 7 offensive linemen back. Their 3 or 4 best running backs back. Le'Veon Moss is back, Amari Daniels, Reuben Owens. Marcel Reed himself obviously is a really good runner. So, Colin Klein as the OC, I think they're going to run the ball as good, if not better, than everybody in the SEC. Just can they be balanced? Can they threaten the defense vertically? Because against SEC defense, you got to be able to do both. You're probably not going to win, 10 games just being a running football team. They went to the transfer portal at wide receiver. They think Terry Bussey's going to take the next step. And so if they can get, somewhat balanced and vertical in the passing game, I think they like their chances over there. And, defensively, they replace a lot on the defensive line, but, they feel like getting better on pass defense is the key to them taking the next step there.
Mike, what is the man? They just seem like they've slipped far behind everybody. Everything that they're doing right now doesn't seem to be working. Now, Elko gives them a breather. Baseball, I know you're mainly working on football, but baseball is disappointing. A&M basketball is disappointing because they didn't get as far as you thought. Your thoughts about, is there a cloud hanging over that campus right now?
The more I do this, the more I've learned that alignment is super important. It's not just about getting the right coach and getting the right players. It's having consistency and, leadership at the athletic director position and at the president position. And I think they've had 5 presidents and 4 athletic directors, like since 2018 or 19, something like that. Like there's just been a ton of turnover at A&M. They haven't seemed to figure out any stability on the back end. And I think that's caused a lot of instability for their major sports. And, Texas dealt with this after DeLoss Dodds, where, they didn't have great leadership at the athletic director spot. And, the 3 major sports, dipped at a pretty big level. Chris Del Conte gets there, and all of a sudden those sports are getting better. That's probably not a coincidence. And so I think A&M's just a crisis of leadership, behind the head coaches, and that's set them up for failure.
Meanwhile, out in Lubbock, there is a big-time hype train being built up right now. I wonder, could you feel it while you were out there? And there's reason, obviously, to be excited, Mike. And they're not shying away from the expectations. I mean, they know. They're outright flaunting the results so far, but they also know it's the results on the field. How do you feel about Texas Tech and just the wave of momentum they're riding right now?
Yeah, I think they're trying to take advantage of the market. And there's this little bit of a gray area between now and the rev share model where you can unload the clip in NIL, and Texas Tech's going for it. They saw what SMU did. They saw Arizona State win the Big 12 and, almost upset Texas in the Peach Bowl. And they said, why not us? Like we can go build a roster to do that. They have, an experienced quarterback. They have a pretty easy schedule, a manageable schedule, at least on paper. And so with the facility upgrades and going into year 4, I think they just decided, hey, we're going to go take advantage of this market, get into the transfer portal, and get good at the places that Tech normally isn't. And that's in the trenches. Like they always have a pretty good 7-on-7 football team for most of my life. That's kind of been the book on Texas Tech. Like they can throw the football around. They're going to score points, but like they're not going to be physical in the run game. They're not going to stop the run and get after the quarterback. They added 3 potential starters on the offensive line and 4 potential starters on the defensive line, a couple in the secondary. Like personnel-wise, they're there. that puts pressure on Joey McGuire to go win. I don't think he's shying away from that. I think he understands what's in front of him.
What was it like to see the facilities? I don't know if that was your first time to see. I mean, those were obviously something that were pumped up a lot and widely shown over those last few months in person. Were they as glorious as they were in picture form?
Yeah, they're pretty nice. I was there for the Colorado game, and they were about half done, like the football coaching offices and stuff. So I'd seen that. But in terms of the new weight room and the player lounge and all that kind of stuff, I was joking with Texas State's former offensive coordinator, Mac Leftwich, who's now there as the offensive coordinator. It was like a little different than San Marcos, huh, bro?
Yeah.
And so, they got like 0 gravity beds and a barber shop in there and all that kind of jazz. So, yeah, I mean, it's super nice. It's a football resort. And I don't think it's a coincidence. TCU's finishing up facilities. Texas is undergoing some stuff. Like, I don't think, Baylor, obviously, just with the Fudge Center and stuff. I don't think it's a coincidence that all these are kind of coming right before the rev share, because in the future, I don't know if the money will be there for those type of projects.
Well, there is a lot of reasons to be excited in Lubbock. Joey
those
was
coordinators
with us.
alone. I mean, those coordinator hires as well. Yeah,
they did, because losing Kitley, obviously, he's really good at what he does. But Smith coming in from Houston, and who they have. There was early on in Joey's tenure, he was probably a little bit too much, like over his skis with what he was expecting, which is excitement. That's who he is. This seems more real. That like is backed up with like meat on the bones than it was a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the personnel's there to go win it. I really like their coordinators. To your point, Sheil Wood, defensive coordinator who was at Houston last year, made the Cougars so much better than they should have been. Like, they had no business being as good as they were defensively. They won a couple games in the Big 12. They beat TCU. They beat Kansas State. And a lot of that was his defense. So I think they're going to take a large step forward defensively. And what Leftwich does is pretty similar to what Kitley does. Leftwich is a disciple of Eric Morris. He was at Incarnate Word with Morris, and then obviously G.J. Kinney there, and then at Texas State. So he's going to run his version of the air raid, and that's the love language of West Texas football out there in Lubbock. So I think offensively they're going to be fine. If they can become a top 3 or 4 defense in the Big 12, I think they'll be in Arlington.
So you mentioned TCU's upgrades there. We just had a story about their roster is not really all that new. Only 8 transfers that they brought in. How confident does that make them now going to a year where they were 8-4 last year? Turnovers were a problem. They just kind of couldn't really separate themselves from the middle of the pack in the Big 12. Is this a year where they can take a big step?
Yeah, Sonny thinks this is their best roster that he's probably ever had anywhere. I mean, they're very talented. They're very deep. They've recruited really well, and they're doing it more organically. They feel going into year 4 that they're going to bet on recruitment and development. Where Texas Tech has kind of gone and made big splashes in the portal. I think TCU is trusting their evaluations and thinks behind the scenes they've homegrown a lot of really good football players. And, I think the most interesting part of modern football right now, even with the frustrations, is everybody's got their own idea on how to make this thing work. And we're going to see in real time kind of what strategies, float to the top. TCU's doing it more with high school recruiting. They like their quarterback a lot. Josh Hoover, they had to replace a lot at wide receiver. But, the Big 12 is so open for business that when you go to Baylor, you go to TCU, you go to Texas Tech, you walk out of it and thinking that all 3 of those could really compete for a Big 12 championship if certain things fall correctly.
How did your Big 12 preseason predictions shake out last year? Ours were awful, and it was, looking at Arizona State obviously was the biggest miss, I think, by everybody. But, Mike, I don't – like, in the SEC, you can say Georgia's going to be good to some extent. Texas and Alabama are going to be good to some extent. So it's kind of easier. I don't feel like there's really any way to ever truly know year in and year out in the Big 12 the way you can kind of know and group the top teams, quote-unquote, in other leagues.
Yeah, I always think Oklahoma State's like the perfect example of what the Big 12 is. Like when you think they're going to be good, they're bad. And when you think they're going to be bad, they're good. And there's always going to be a team that jumps from the bottom. It was Baylor in 21. It was TCU in 22. Oklahoma State in 23, and then Arizona State in 24. So there's going to be a team that we, chalk as a victory and everybody overlooks on a schedule that in November is going to be the hardest team on the schedule. And there's going to be a couple teams at the top that don't work out and end up being bad and are easy wins. Like, who would have seen BYU come in last year? And so, yeah, that's what I love about the Big 12. I think it's the most entertaining and fun conference because it's not as top heavy as the other ones. I mean, even the ACC is very top heavy for the most part. And so I think that's the fun part. I think it's like it harkens back to a day of college football that I think a lot of us miss. And I'm excited about this season because I think the transfer portal and NIL has helped the Big 12 as much as anybody, even if that's counterintuitive to the big money stuff.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And the conference is about the time you think you know something, the next year coming back, you're right. That you gave the history of teams that have come basically from the gutter into playing and winning championships in the conference. Now, Baylor, Sawyer Robertson. It just seemed like you could just say his name, Mike, and that's enough to give everybody a big boost and a goose. They got more, and they got to get better in many ways, but what does just his presence after what we saw last year and what we read about him and what you saw mean to this Baylor football team?
You know, I think a lot of times we look at culture as something that's from a bygone era, that in the transfer portal era and with NIL, culture takes a back burner. I'd argue it's more important than ever. And a guy like Sawyer Robinson and even like a Keaton Thomas on defense, who can just be the leaders of the team, who can be the translators between the coaching staff, who can be in the locker rooms, who can be at the parties, who can be at study hall, and kind of just be the connectors, can help the transfers come in, can help the true freshmen come in. Like we were talking about at the beginning, there's so much turnover on these rosters that you need those guys. You need those connectors. And, I just think Sawyer is an elite leader and obviously a really good quarterback. And if you combine those two things in college football, like you're going to have a chance to be a good football team. And I like the pieces around them. I'm on record. I mean, I think Baylor is going to be like the team. Like there's always a team in Texas that kind of surprises and makes a real run. Like I think Baylor's going to be that team. I really like the Bears this year.
You go to Texas later, but obviously everything's set up for them. They lose a lot of players that are going to be playing in the NFL next, but they'll reload. They got some key transfers. What are your thoughts about, without being there yet, but just watching them as they've added during the offseason?
Yeah, it's fascinating. Clemson gets all of this, hate for not really using the transfer portal, and Texas has obviously used the transfer portal a lot. But you look at like they're expected too deep going into this year, and there's not many transfers on it. A couple at defensive tackle, but they've recruited really well behind the scenes, and I think we're going to start to see a lot of those young guys. And with the extra COVID year, there was like this stockpile of talent that just hung around in college football for a long time, and it's finally graduated in a large portion. And, I think the Longhorns are one of those teams where, a new crop of players are going to emerge, and I think that's fun, right? I mean, we're in college football, you like the turnover and the next thing and who's the sophomore that's finally going to emerge. And that's been blockaded a little bit the last couple of years. And, I think the Longhorns are fresh. I mean, they lost a lot of wide receiver. They lost their tight end. Obviously, the quarterback. They're going to be really good running the football. But I trust that recruiting. I think they're going to be pretty good. The lines of scrimmage should be solid. And I'd imagine they're a 9-3, 10-2 type playoff team. The
non-FBS schools like Texas State, UTSA, with great coaches and guys that know each other. Hell, G.J. Kenny played for Jeff Traylor in high school. Where they are in the pecking order and what are their expectations, Mike?
That's a great question. I think if you ask them, maybe they'd have a different answer than if you ask me. I think coaches tend to be eternal optimists, and like they don't look at it as being in this huge deficit and they're playing a different sport than these other guys. Like, they'll say, give me a football, line me up, and we can go beat those guys even if they have a bigger budget. But there's players on teams at the P4 level that are making more in NIL than whole teams at the G5 level, right? Like when UTEP goes and plays at Texas in non-conference this year, Arch Manning's making more than the whole UTEP football team. And by football team, I also mean the coaches, right? Like Texas is going to have 10 to 15 players that are making more than the head coach at UTEP, right? Like the budgets are so far out of whack and going to grow even further out of whack with rev share that I would argue that they're not really playing the same sport. And I think we're headed towards a split where there's different playoffs and different champions. And, maybe there's a promotion and getting relegated like in soccer across the seas. So I think the gap is only getting wider. Like I've said this when I started doing research for the magazine, there's not a single all-conference player from the G5 level in the state that's returning to their football team. They either transferred or they graduated. And so I'd imagine that's true across the nation. And I just think the gulf is getting bigger and bigger, and the job is harder and harder. And it's why you see some head coaches becoming coordinators at the P4 level, because the old route was be a P4 coordinator, get the G5 head coaching job, have success there, go become a big time head coach. Well, now it's so hard to be successful at the G5 level consistently because your roster is a 1-year proposition. That how do you build enough momentum unless you're at Boise State or Memphis or Tulane to go get that next job? And so I think we're going to see the coaching talent dip at that level, just like we're seeing the player talent dip at that level.
The whole roster and coaching staff combined making less than the FBS schools in certain cases. And it's not going to change. As you said, the gap gets larger and larger. North Texas with Eric Morris, who's done a nice job, got work to do. There's another one of those schools that kind of playing uphill against the stream in what you expect from them.
Yeah, I think North Texas has a chance to make a real run at the AAC. Like Eric Morris's offense are always going to score points. He's got to replace his leading passer, leading rusher, and leading receiver for the I guess third straight year because of the transfer portal. But they've been a top 10 total offense both years he's been there. I mean, I just trust the fact that Mean Green are going to score points. Their issue has been defensively. Like they have been atrocious defensively since he's got there. Skylar Cassidy is about as well respected of a young defensive coordinator as you can find. I mean, he walked into Sam Houston last year, and I think they went from like a scoring defense in the 70s to a scoring defense in the 40s. Like, they really made a jump in year one and then ended up winning 10 games. They're another team that the schedule works out really well for them. They don't play Memphis. They don't play Tulane. They get UTSA at home. So if that defense can just be average and they keep scoring points the way that they do, I mean, they might win 9 or 10 games and be one of the best G5s, and not the best G5s in the state.
You have been to these places, spent a lot of time with them. I saw what you mentioned about Morris and defensive coordinator. You mentioned Cassidy that went position by position. If I mention one of the schools you've been to, would it be, not trying to catch you off guard, but a player that you think is the most intriguing story or one that may be under the radar?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of them at all these places, I guess. I mean, there's position units that kind of stand out to me for sure. Yeah, I don't know. You stop at all these places so much so quickly, you kind of just like get over flooded with information. But I think just of the teams we've talked about, SMU's defense is probably the one that sticks out to me the most, and just kind of who emerges over there.
Mike, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it. Continued luck. By the way, it's at Craven Mike, Craven Mike. He has got synopsis, analysis, etc., summaries of the places he's been and of the schools we've talked about and still met. Where you go tomorrow?
I go to Texas State tomorrow, then UTSA, then Houston, then Rice over the rest of the week, and then I'll back up.
All right, buddy. Thank you, man. Good stuff. Mike Craven, Dave Campbell's Texas Football Magazine, joins us on 365 Sport. Appreciate his time.